And Pastor Billy and I, we left last Sunday to go to Malawi. We spent 50 hours on a plane this week, 3 nights in an airplane, and it was worth it. It was amazing. I'm going to share a lot of that with you today. I have to give you a couple warnings, though. Pastor Billy and I, we're operating on very little sleep. I don't know what I'm going to say up here. I have some notes, but I don't know what that's going to happen, and we'll see. So don't hold today against me. If this is your first time, you're like, you got a weird pastor. No, he's just tired, okay? But I don't want to waste this moment or miss this opportunity to share with you what God really spoke and did this week. It really was a powerful week. We're also going to go a little bit shorter, I think. We'll see how that goes today so that you can pick your envelope up if you partnered with us last week. And if you're new or if you're just joining us, you missed last week, what we're doing is we're closing out a chosen campaign where we partnered with World Vision. And what we're doing is we're sponsoring children. And there's still a room for you to do that if you like. If you didn't do it last week, or if you're just hearing about it, we have some more information for you. But it has been a powerful week. And I flew all the way to Africa to come back and tell you this. Y'all, and I can say y'all, by the way, because I was born in North Carolina. I'm a true Southerner, but y'all are spoiled. I used to think that we're blessed when we have a roof over our head and food to eat, but that's not blessing. What I learned this week is blessing is actually having a sink and a toilet. There's a lot of things that we'll share, and one of the common things that when you go to a third world country, if you've been to one before, is you'll come back and you're like, oh my goodness, like I have too many blessings as we compare our life to theirs, and sometimes we can feel shame or guilt or those things, but I don't think that we need to feel those things, but what I do believe is that all of us in this room have an opportunity to actually bless other people. We've been blessed beyond measure, and I believe out of that blessing, we need to bless other people. And so it was just, I was thinking about California. We've been in a constant drought, and we've got a lot of precipitation this winter and spring, and I don't know if we're creeping out of the drought status, but I remember last year complaining that I could only water my grass for 2 days a week. Now I can't even fathom explaining a sprinkler to someone in a village in Malawi. Let me share some good news with you, church. You are amazing. Last week, we had this incredible campaign. Many of you, maybe you hadn't heard of World Vision, or you are just brand new to maybe this concept of really sponsoring and helping people, and you showed up in a huge way. Today's a big celebration. You're going to see a picture if you were part of our campaign, and that was such a special time I'll talk about in a moment, but I have to tell you some good news. We as a church, we sponsored 337 kids. That's incredible. And on my flight home, I was thinking about, okay, what are the things that I know now that I didn't know last week? And what are the things that I've seen now that I hadn't seen before last week? And what I realized is that we're not just sponsoring 337 children. We've actually, as a church, adopted communities. Now, here's some incredible news. They've done some chosen parties in Malawi before this past week, and really when they did a party, they would have between 100 and maybe 150 kids that were being chosen. That was their large party, 150. And they were so thankful and grateful for all those things, but because of your generosity, and we partnered with a few other churches over this past week to really adopt Malawi. Because of your generosity, they hosted not one, but their 2 largest choosing parties this past week. Now, here's what that means. That means that we went to a community, and because we had so many partnerships and sponsorships, and with your faithfulness and generosity, they actually had to open up another choosing party last week because so many kids were being sponsored. And I mentioned last week how their largest choosing party was 150 kids. Last Wednesday, they had 2 choosing parties of over 280 kids each. It was amazing. So we actually, when you see your pictures and when you see that child who chose you, remember, they came from 2 communities, either Banje, Malawi, or Muchenda, Malawi. And here's what that means. That means in those 2 communities, we as a church, we adopted these communities and we're helping them with water, with education, with gospel training, with even basic hygiene, with those things that they need that we often will take for granted. So church, let me tell you, last week, you've done some good work. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for your generosity in doing some great things. One person's excited. That's okay. She's like, I'm so glad we did some good work. And so, but anyway, it was an incredible week. I was thinking about just all the things that you and I have to experience over here, and God has been so good and so faithful to us. And, it was an eye-opening trip of thinking about all the things that we just we enjoy, and I'm grateful that we enjoy, but I believe that there's some things yet for us to continue to do. We spent a lot of time driving to remote places, and I'll share some pictures in a moment of just some villages that really have some challenges that you and I have never even had to really consider or think about. And again, I'm not shaming or guilting us, and it's okay for us to enjoy God's blessings, but I want us to know that this is really, I saw a scarcity mindset personified this week. And it was just a way of life. It was a way of life of how they do, but when often in America, I don't think that we should ever live in a scarcity mindset again where we just are thinking we don't have enough. Church, we are so blessed. And I think that God has placed you here in this country, in this community, in this church, so you can have an abundant mindset to bless other people. And so I thank you for all that you've done. If you have your Bible, turn over to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse number 9. We're going to read 2 verses, and I have a brief message for you, and I'm going to share a story at the end because I believe there's one more thing that God's calling our church to do. And I want to share that with you in a moment. But in 1 Peter chapter number 2, verse number 9, as we close out our series, we read this, and think about who's writing this. This is Peter, one of Jesus' disciples. Here's what he wrote in verse number 9. He says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his possession, so that you may proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. You had not received mercy, but now you had received mercy." You know, as you look at these pictures today, as you see this envelope of this child, this boy, this girl who chose you, it's interesting as you think about that because we were there, Pastor Billy and I, and we were seeing the boys choose you and choose your picture, and it was incredible to see, but they would ask the children, like, well, why did you choose that family or that person? And they would give various responses, like, oh, she's beautiful, or he's handsome, or they have a good smile, or their family is as big as mine. And then one of the little boys, he had this picture of he was a white man in this picture, and why did you choose him? He's white, and so I picked him because he's white, and so he hadn't seen a lot of white men in his life, so he's like, I'm going to choose you. And so there were so many reasons of why these boys and girls were choosing you and choosing the families that were going to sponsor them. And when I think about that word chosen and even being chosen, the idea is that you and I were being called out. So your picture, and we, by the way, Sunday night we're at the airport, Pastor Billy and I, we're just scrolling through your photos, and it just brings tears to our eyes of the stories of God's goodness in your life. I'm so grateful we've been singing about God's goodness today because God is so good to us. But we were it took us half an hour or more to kind of continue scrolling through the photos and seeing your faces, your families, and knowing what God's done in your life. It was just incredible, powerful moment, even before we got on the plane, of just seeing what God's doing through you to bless others. But let me tell you, you and I are being called out. We are chosen by God, not just to be blessed and to live in those blessings ourselves, but to actually move forward. Because what I found this past week, in verse number 10 we read a moment ago, is that these boys and girls, these communities, they were people. They were people that God loved and created, but they were people that were disadvantaged. And now they, because of your faithfulness, now they are moving into a place of blessing themselves. And their blessing is not maybe the same as our blessing here, but they are so grateful for what you've been doing. And I love what we read in verse 10. You had not received mercy, but now you had received mercy. One of the beautiful things about this Chosen campaign is that you and I have now given mercy to communities, and they will never be the same. I just have one simple thought I want to share with you today as we have this idea of being chosen, and just one bottom line I want to give to you. When you think about Peter, he was the one who wrote this passage, and if anybody knew what it was like to be chosen, it was Peter. Peter was this kind of bombastic fisherman, this guy who just spoke way before he thought. He just put his foot in his mouth often. He always did some things that you're like, Peter, what are you doing? Are you even thinking? And he was this guy that tried to make everything work, and then Jesus comes. And he calls him out and says, hey, follow me and I'll make you a fisher of men. I shared this a few weeks ago. I love in the series Chosen how Peter then goes to his wife and is excitedly telling him that Jesus called me to be his disciple and I don't even know what it means. And that's the idea that when he calls you out, we don't often know what Jesus is doing in our life, but all we know is that he chose us. And what I love about this idea is that Jesus chose you. And what it's incredible now is that we're choosing others and we're helping others now, and that is what I believe God's plan for our life is. Now, here's the bottom line I want to share with you today, our one simple thought. It's this. The bottom line of this passage is you are chosen not for what you've done, but for what you can become. There's not a person in here that you and I can do something that would be great enough to grant us entrance into heaven. Now, you just allowed yourself to be chosen by a family in Africa. And what a great thing that was. But just doing that in isolation doesn't mean now that you get to go to heaven on your own. We're not chosen for what we have done because none of us can do enough to get in heaven. The Bible tells us in Romans that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There is none righteous, no, not one. And so Jesus didn't choose you because they're like, you know what? I really need a successful businessman or a businesswoman. I need you to be in my kingdom. And so because of what you've done in your portfolio, I need you to be in my ministry. That's not how Jesus works. The way he views all of us is through sin. We've all fallen short. The Bible tells us in Isaiah that even our righteousness, even our good deeds are but as filthy rags. So we haven't been chosen for what we've done because we can't do enough. But guess what? God has chosen you for who you can become. You can become more like the image of Jesus, more Christ-like, more like the Father, more led by the Holy Spirit. That idea of being called out means, hey, I know where you are right now, but I can see where you're going in the future. I want to call that out of you. So when we step out of this scarcity mindset, of this mindset that says, I need all that I have for me, and we step out and say, you know what, I'm gonna help a country. I'm going to help a community in a place that maybe I'll never get to because I know there's a need over there. Guess what you're doing? You're being called out. You're being chosen for what you can or who you can become. Paul writes it this way in Ephesians chapter 1, verse number 4. He says this, for he, God, chose us in him. I love this. Before the foundation of the world to be holy and blameless in love before him. He predestined us to be adopted as sons through Jesus Christ for himself, according to the good pleasure of his will. So even before the foundations of the world, God knew you would be in this community, in this place, with your family, with your situation. He knew all these things about you, and yet he still chose you. If you were to air out all of your dirty laundry, if you were to show all the skeletons in your closet, if you were to do all the things that you'd be so ashamed of to even think about on a Sunday, much less perhaps show to others, God still chose you because he's not choosing you because of what you've done. You know, we didn't go to Malawi and we didn't have a screener with these kids. Like, okay, now what do you have to offer to that family? Now, what can you do? Now, you just pick that man. What are you going to be able to do for them? There was no screening. There was no test that we said, what can you do for them? All it was, hey, do you need mercy? Do you need grace? In fact, they had at our choosing party, there was nearly 300 kids there that were ready to be chosen, and there was hundreds in this service and this presentation. They had girls. I shared it on social media. Just recite John 3:16, which was super powerful and moving. Then they had some singing and some performances there. They had a distinguished guest. She was in the government, and she was a minister of something. I'm still on some time. I don't even know. I don't know if I'm making sense right now. So I hope that you hear the Bible. That's all I hear. I hope you hear today. But she was a distinguished guest that they brought there, and she actually was from that community as one of those little girls. And someone had chosen her and had been supporting that community decades ago, and now she was trying to make a difference in the community that she had been to because she wasn't chosen for what she was doing. She is chosen for who she could become. And you and I, we're chosen for who we can become. We're chosen for those things that God can call out of us. Because there's nothing that you can do to gain more of God's love than to just allow Him to choose you. You see, God chose you for who you can become. The most impactful moment of the trip came on our very last day there. We drove around. In fact, we spent a lot of time driving. There's not, we don't have the freeways that connect everything. There's no Google Maps to get you from this village to this village, because you had to drive through rivers and up hills and mountains, and you had to go on dirt roads many times. And we just drove for a couple of hours sometimes to different places to try to meet people there. And this was on Thursday, and we were driving around and meeting some different villages, and we went to a church service on Thursday, and it was powerful with their worship, and they have expressive worship in Malawi. Like, they get moving and grooving. I don't have enough rhythm to worship in Malawi, like that is for sure. But they had, it was an incredible time, and one of the pastors there preached, and it was translated. It was just a really moving moment there, and then we went to some villages, and there was a village there that they've been around for more than 100 years. And it was a village that had no water, no running water. In fact, there's a picture, I think, of this man. It's an older man that I saw. I don't remember his name. It's too many syllables for me to remember. But he came up and told a story, and I think there's a picture to show you. They did the village of about 600 people. They had this presentation to share with the foreigners, the pastors that were there, and they were sharing some of the challenges that they were facing. And this man, he gets up and through a translator tells us that he was born in 1930. He was 93 years old. He's lived in that village his entire life, and he has never experienced running water. This is a village of about 600 people in multiple, huts that were all over the place with thatch roofs. And he was not complaining. He was not upset. Nobody was. He was just sharing, like, this is my story. And so then we were wondering, well, okay, where does this village get their water? We're not even talking about sinks or a faucet. We're talking about get water in general. And so we actually were shown, and the next picture this is where they got their water. They got their water right here. It was a little mountain side that you would walk down into, and actually to get to their village, we ended up driving through this small lake or river. And what this village would do is they would go down to this lake, and they would grab their buckets, and they kind of did some filtration things on the side where they dig a hole and try to filter it out. But as you can imagine, drinking water like this, there's been many outbreaks of cholera there. And it was just this is their water source. There was a little girl, I don't think you can see her in the picture. Maybe on the bottom you can, in the pink shirt. She was actually washing her clothes. She was like 8 years old, and she was like beating the dirt out of those clothes against the rock. She was going at it, and she was just so happy and excited and smiling and washing her clothes. And I saw that man, and it was, the Holy Spirit was just like, you have to do something. You have to do something. And it was like this, and I just really felt the Lord telling me, you have to get this man water before he dies. This man has to be able to have, and now again, we're not talking about, we're going to go put faucets in each of their huts. We're talking about one central place of water in their village. So we began figuring out what does that look like and how does that work. And there's another picture. This is called a borehole, and there's a picture here of what that might look like. And this is a place where they would actually go and get water. They would pump out, and it was maybe a modern well, if you will. And so it was this borehole that you can drill down into and have some water source for the community. And there's a long handle there that you see with a bucket, and you push that down, and actually that water come up. And I think there might be a video of me doing one, and we can show that as well while I talk about it. They asked me to do it, and I was a little nervous because I didn't want to waste their water. They're like, pour it out the water. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that because I don't think I want to. But they had a bucket. They don't let a drop go to waste. And so they had a bucket there, and you push down on this handle, and water's coming out of the faucet there. And again, think about hundreds of people in an area. They would have to walk. In fact, this borehole from that village was over 3 miles away. So if they wanted to go get some water here, they'd have to walk 6 miles round trip just to get a 5-gallon bucket of water. Many of the Malawians, and I'm sure much in Africa, but we were specifically in Malawi, they would spend just a whole day doing one thing, maybe going to the market to get some corn or some rice, or maybe going to get some water. And so we began talking about, I gathered all the pastors there, and they're from all over the country, and we were just talking about, we've got to get this village, we've got to get that man specifically water before he passes. Now, we hear a lot about, let's go change the world. Let's go change the world. And I don't know if we can change the world. The world is too big. It's global. And I don't know that God's necessarily called us to change the world. I think God's called us to change our world. And for whatever reason, God has brought Malawi into the orbit of our world right now. And I think that we're called to change our world, which for right now, or for whatever that looks like, Malawi is in our world. And so it just was, we got some information and figured out, okay, what does it cost to put a borehole in this village? And so we got a cost, and it was $6,000 to $7,000. And so there's 7 churches that were there. We're like, okay, we're going to partner together, and we're going to get that man some water. We're going to get that village some water. There's so many babies in this village, and there's so many children in this village that, let me tell you, we may not be able to change the world, but we can change their lives. And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You are the first service, and so I have a big ask for you in this service. We're partnering with these 6 other churches, and each of us has committed, our churches, that we're gonna pull together $7,000, and so we're gonna raise $1,000 for each of our churches, and we're gonna send that over. We've already got it all worked out where it takes about a month to get that borehole kind of drilled and taken care of, and they are ready to go. And so here's what I'm going to ask you, 8:30 service. And I think there's someone even in this room, or maybe a collection of people in this room, that could just help me knock it out right now. So that way in our 10, 11:30 service, we could just celebrate all day long. But I believe as a church, we can raise that $1,000 and say, let's get this village some water. We don't really understand the importance of water. One of the pastors I went with, and he's in his late 60s now. The first time he went to Malawi was in 1993. And he said ever since then, for 30 years, he doesn't even brush his teeth with running water because he knows that there's people that don't have it. And it reminds him, I need to pray for those who don't have access to clean water. And so what I'm asking you today, 8:30 service specifically, is let's raise in this service $1,000, partner with some churches, and go get that village some water. Now, you can do that a couple of ways. You can put it in an envelope, and you can just put Malawi water if you like, and drop that off with our usher. If you want to give online, there's a drop down in the tab that says Malawi water. This is one of those things where I was like, okay, Lord, this is you. You know, there's some things, I shared this with you last week. I think there are some things you don't have to pray about, but I also think that there's some things that sometimes we wonder, was the Lord speaking to me? Well, I know the devil wasn't telling me, go get them some water in that village. And so there's some things in our life that we realize, hey, God is speaking to us. And let me tell you, I know that sometimes we're like, wait, well, finances and economics, or I don't know if we're in a recession or a downturn, and I get it. There's challenges here. And we don't ask every week, but I believe that there's moments that God brings to us and says, hey, you can go make a difference. Why? Because you are chosen. You're chosen. Not for who you are, because we're sinners saved by grace, but for what we can become, which is a people that can change, maybe not the world, but we can change our world. And right now, our world, God has chosen to bring Malawi into our orbit, and so let's go make a difference. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me as we wrap up our time together? And I want to encourage you that you are chosen. Now, I don't know what that means specifically for you. God has an incredible plan for you because He is a good, good God. But let me encourage you today that if you have never said yes to God, I want you to know that He is here for you. You are in a group of people, a room full of people who are not perfect. But you're in a room full of people who've been chosen by God, who love Jesus, who want to make a difference in the world. And so if you've never said yes in this service or in any time in your life, I want to encourage you, and we do this every time, and I want to encourage you that this will be the moment where you say yes. Every head is bowed, every eye is closed. We're going to go into communion in a moment. We're going to worship together one last time, and then we're going to go find our envelope and see who chose us. But before we do all of those things, I want to encourage you in this moment to say yes to God. How we do it here is at the Highlands is I won't ask you to come forward or stand, or I won't embarrass you in any way. I just want to pray with you. And I'll just lead you in a short, simple prayer where you are. All I ask is that you just simply, in a moment, raise your hand. And if you say, Pastor Jeremy, I've never called out to God, I've never asked him to forgive me, I've never been chosen by him, but I want to today. No one's looking around, every head is bowed, every eye is closed. But if you would say, Pastor Jeremy, I want to pray, would you lead me into a prayer? Would you do me the honor in this service of just simply, just raise your hand? Anybody in this room that would say, Pastor Jeremy, would you lead me in that prayer? I want to be chosen. I want to say yes to God. I see you. I see you. What a great decision you both are making. I see you as well. My far left, thank you for your honesty. I see you over here on my right and over here as well. I see both of you. God bless you. Amen. What a great decision that you're making. I see you too. You are chosen. I see you all the way in the back. I agree with you. Thank you for your honesty. If you're watching online, you can join those in this room. God chose you. All we do is say yes. And so if you just raised your hand in this room, if you're watching online and you want to join us in prayer, pray something along these lines with me. Pray, dear God, thank you for loving me. Thank you for sending your son Jesus to die on the cross for me. I know that I'm a sinner. I know that I've done wrong. But would you forgive me? Would you come into my life and clean me from the inside out and help me to follow you all of my days? Thank you for choosing me. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.